good morning. You know, I've been watching other ministers, and the ones that are really cool sit down and make it very casual. So I'm going to try this. I haven't done this, for 38 years, so I don't feel very comfortable. Listen, a couple things. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, and I thought what we would do is just ask how many veterans we have. We're not making it a big political deal. We just want to thank you for serving in the armed forces. So if you're a veteran, would you just stand for a moment? Great. And if you're a veteran and had a dishonorable discharge, if you'd like to stand, I'm kidding. Hey, we're glad. Hey, before we get into the next couple of steps, a couple of things is this. Kathy Bile, who's been our secretary for such a long time, she's retiring, from that position at VC. And usually when stuff changes, no matter how innocent, no matter how, usually in a church, people, what happened? Was it a drinking problem? Or did she not get along well with Dwight, the new pastor? Or was she caught embezzling money? So I just want to let all that stop and just say, the reason she's retiring is that she just wants to spend more time with her grandchildren. Chris, are you actually going to take that? Gosh, it couldn't have been a worse time, Chris. She just wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren at her new home on the Grand Cayman Islands. All right. So when Kathy wanted to retire, we understand that. When she decided to retire, we as a church, leaders felt like we wanted to go with one full-time person, and that person from outside the church. So we hired Beth Patrick, and everyone who's known her, if you haven't met her, come by the church office when she's here around 8:30 to 5, and get to know her, because she's great. Everyone that knows her likes her, and she's very efficient, does great work. Not as good as Kathy, but does really good work. And so I want to publicly thank Kathy and also Debbie Geddes for their many years of service at our church. And appreciate it. We're on these next steps, and these steps get a little more difficult as we get into it. Making mistakes is just a part of being a human being. We all make mistakes. But most of us can get away with it because people don't see all of our mistakes unless it's in print. If it's in print, people see it. I want to give you some true, actual church bulletin bloopers that was actually printed. Not in our church, because Kathy kept that under wraps. These are actual church bulletin bloopers. And you can just see a church doing this. A secretary wants to get out of the office on Friday and just, don't let worry kill you. Let the church help. All right, and here's a good one. This evening's sermon, what is hell? Come early and listen to our choir practice. Here's one. Co-ed Weight Watchers will meet this Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Please use the double doors at the side entrance. Here's one that I hope I never read here. During the absence of our pastor, we had the rare privilege of hearing a good sermon when A.B. Doyle supplied our pulpit. Mistakes are hard to overcome when they're in print. But mistakes are, when you make amends, can be difficult as well. And so those are the two steps. Let's look at them. Step 8. Step 8 says this. We made a list of all the people, all the persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them all. And then that's followed, we connected to step 9 because they're very similar. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do that would injure them more or would injure others. So if you've just been with us, and I'm glad you've been with us. By the way, if you're visiting, I'm really glad you're here. If this is your first time, our church is, we're moving, and we're not going to be satisfied with the status quo. We want to make an impact for the kingdom. And so we're glad you're able to be with us this morning. The early steps are really all about us, or about you, about me. We took a moral inventory. We admitted our character defects, and all of us have character defects. We admitted them to God. We admitted them to ourselves. And hopefully we admitted them to somebody else, somebody with flesh and blood. And then we started to do, with the work of the Spirit, some repair work in our lives. When we come to step 8 and 9, we're still doing repair work, but this time it has to do with other people, It's about others. I don't know if you know this. I'm sure many of you who are in denial probably don't. But none of our character defects are done in a vacuum. In other words, it doesn't just affect us. It affects other people. A kid grows up with your anger issues and has suffered as a result of it. A spouse who has lived under your control issues has probably developed anger, resentment. Might be passive, but it's anger. A family has suffered. A family is never quite the same because of chemical dependence. Other people live in the backwash of our defects. In fact, sometimes they live their entire lives. But now, you're aware of it. You admitted it. You admitted it before God. You admitted it to yourself. You admitted it, hopefully, to someone else. And now you understand that others have suffered because of it. And that needs to be addressed. And so that's what we're doing today. We're making amends. And I got to tell you, that runs contrary to our nature. We would say something like this: well, why do I have to do that? I mean, I confessed it to God. God's forgiven me. Why do I have to be sort of stuck in my past? I admitted it. To make amends to somebody else, it's keeping me stuck in the same mistakes I made. I want to get past it. So let me just say this. Making amends has very little to do with your past, but it has a lot to do with your future. Making amends allows us to move forward. It allows us to move on. You see, before your future, you cannot move forward because there can't be real growth. Before, you had relationships that are not as healthy. There's certain things that making amends, it does for us. Here's one. It helps us to clean out the guilt. We have to clean out the guilt. We have to clean out, because of our defects, we have to clean out the shame. We have to clean out the pain that has littered our lives and our relationships. One writer puts it this way: it is not until we pull out all the underbrush, all the weeds, and all the stumps of our past that we can begin to grow a new garden. Many of you may remember this term, love canal. Remember that? Ever heard of a place called Love Canal? It's because you're young. Love Canal. It's in upstate New York. And if you don't remember it, I'll refresh your memory. It was an environmental disaster. 36 acres affected by decades of dumping and leaking toxic waste. And the companies that were involved in it, they stopped. They understood that what they were doing was wrong. They admitted it. In fact, it had been years since they had dumped any new toxic waste. But the question was, nothing was done in the aftermath of the past. Because people were still getting sick, coming down with cancer in alarming rates. They were living in the aftermath of that toxic dumping. See, step 8 and 9, they involve other people. They are also, it involves you, your future. Others may be helped by your making amends. And I'm sure there's probably spouses here, parents, children, who would love to hear some acknowledgement from you. But primarily, making amends, listen, is for you. It's for your growth. But here's the problem. I think whenever you start doing something like this, making amends, you're going to have a lot of reasons not to do it. And so I want to give you at least got 2 of these for me, but there's at least 5 barriers that will keep us from making amends with other people. So I figure if I give you these barriers, you might want to write them down, and then it might help you be better able to deal with it when it comes up in your life. Here's the first barrier. The first barrier I would call self-deception barrier. And it goes like this. This is what people say. Oh, come on. I haven't hurt anybody. I was a good guy. I was a good woman. I was a good mom. Oh, I wasn't perfect. I might have been a little bit controlling. But my drinking didn't really affect my kids. After all, they're all in college. That's self-deception. Another one is this, defense barrier. They would say this, okay, maybe I did hurt someone, but look at what they did to me. I mean, they should be the ones coming to me to make amends. I mean, they were the biggest reason why I had those defects. If it wasn't for my spouse, I probably wouldn't ever drink. Third, sorry, hon. Self-interest barrier. Self-interest, something like this. No way am I going to give power to another person over me by admitting that I've done something wrong. By doing that, I would be elevating them and I would be belittling myself. No way I'm going to do it. Here's one I usually have a problem with, image barrier. I don't want to blow my image. I mean, I have a lot of people thinking I'm pretty good. Most people think I'm wonderful. If I actually had to admit to someone that I harmed them, that'd be tough. And by the way, they may not even know that I harmed them. So I would just be stirring the pot. 2 more. Self-protection barrier. And this is pretty normal. Dwight, it would scare me to death to go to someone and apologize. I mean, to sit down with them and look at them eye to eye and say, I'm sorry. That just scares me. I'd rather just keep this whole defect between me and God. And the last one, self-importance barrier. And that's just another way of saying pride. Why do I have to humble myself to someone else? They got their own defects. I don't see them making amends to me, so why should I? In fact, again, I think they cause some of my defects. So those are the barriers that most of us will face when you get ready to do this step. This is where we kind of come in the 12-step program, where you end up saying, man, this is getting a bit tiresome. I mean, step 5 was tough enough that I had to go to somebody and say to somebody else, I have these defects. And now you say I have to go to someone else and then make amends? See, I got to say it again. If we don't do these steps, we cannot move forward. Because the guilt, the shame will keep us in our past. They will be there till the day that we die. And we will have regrets that will never heal in our lives. And you will have a spiritual life that will just languish. So I want you to see, first of all, and stick with me, I want you to see the benefits of making amends. Making amends benefits, first of all, my emotional health. And it does this by helping us to forgive ourselves. Is that a problem for you? A lot of times people say this to me, Dwight, I know that God has forgiven me, but I just can't forgive myself. Other people say it like this, I don't feel forgiven. See, one of the reasons we have never forgiven ourselves is that we've never really brought closure to our wrongdoing. And by seeking forgiveness to the people we hurt, it helps bring freedom to us. See, all of us have felt the feeling of being held hostage by guilt. When we acknowledge the people we have injured, it frees us. Let me give you a little bit of an example, and this is going to date me. When I was in the 10th grade, I had a paper route. I was a paper boy. How many of you know what a paper boy is? Because everything's digital, right? Yeah, I had a paper route, a huge paper route. And I remember I would start out with these 2 big canvas bags with papers folded up in each bag. I mean, and I'm not kidding you. When I started to walk, I had to, be very careful, because if I lost my balance, I was dead, because there was a huge amount of papers. And then on Sunday, especially, because Sundays were all the stores put in all kinds of magazines and flyers, like our bulletin. And I would lose my balance. My back would start to hurt. I would start out the route like this, walking. But as I go through the route, each house would get a newspaper. So I would take one out, always throw it in the bushes. People love that. Try to, oh, he hit it again. And, I would take it out, one alternating so that I wouldn't get like this. And so you would just do that. As I would go through my route, my burden would become lighter. And I still remember the feeling at the end of the route when I was walking back to my house. There was nothing but just the bags. Nothing but just the bags. And it just felt so light, and I could walk. You ever heard of emotional baggage? Filled not with newspapers, but with guilt and with anger. When we make amends to the people that we've wronged, as tough and as embarrassing as that can be, our load gets lighter. The stuff that once drained our emotions, the stuff that we carry through life, as we get rid of it, as we make amends, it lightens our burden. Making amends addresses our emotional health. It also benefits our relational health. And do I even have to address this? You know this. There are people here who are hurting because of you, because of your resentment, or maybe because of your out-of-control anger, which is really fear, or your emotional intimacy issues. Because you're robbing people of the basic need. And what is the basic need? Everyone has this basic need, to know someone and to be fully known. These people need you to make amends. And just admitting that you have done those things begins to restore the relationship. And let me just say this, lest you miss it. Making amends is not just saying sorry, right? It's not just saying, hey, honey, I had a problem, but hey, honey, I'm sorry. Hey, kids, sorry about that. That's not making amends. A lot of times when we say I'm sorry, we are still maintaining control. Because we end up saying this, oh, I did the step 8. Okay, I said I'm sorry, so now I'm back on top. No, when we make amends, it is saying to our husband, to our wife, to our parents, to our children, I am so sorry. How can I correct this? I admitted this to God. I admitted my wrong to myself, to someone else. Will you please forgive me? And then you have to wait for their response. You see the difference? If you just say, oh, I'm sorry, you're in control. When you say that, you lose control. You make yourself vulnerable because you have to wait for the answer. And therapists call that sometimes the hang time. You know what hang time is? Hang time in football? The kicker kicks the ball to the other team. And the hang time is how long the ball stays in the air. And it's good to have a long hang time because it gets your players down the field to cover. When you speak to a child or to a spouse, someone that's been wronged, and you say, I'm sorry, I see this, I want to make it right. What can I do to allow us, to make us, to go forward? Please forgive me. Then there's a hang time. Why? Because you kicked the ball to them. Now they're in control. Now they have the power. Now their offense comes on the field. One of the best examples I've ever read about this is from a guy named Lee Strobel. Anybody know Lee Strobel or heard of Lee Strobel? Yeah, Lee Strobel. You got to hear this. This is great because it's right close to Halloween. Here's what he writes. We had just gotten back from trick-and-treating. It was the first time my 5-year-old daughter, Allison, really knew what it was all about. We had gone before, but she was so young and really too apprehensive, almost scared to enjoy it. This time, she looked forward to it. So when we got back from trick-or-treating, Allison dumped her plastic jack-o'-lantern all over the kitchen table. And she began to separate her candy into 3 categories. I remember doing this, by the way. You know, everybody does this, right? The first category is the good candy, right? He writes Snickers, Reese's Cup, Baby Ruth, that kind of stuff. The second group is the middle group of candy. I didn't write this, Mars. Medium candy, M&Ms, Milk Duds, Taffy. And then the last group she had was the not-so-good candy. And this could be best defined as candy that could be easily accessible from grandparents or dental offices. It was the candy that you never purchase, right? Oh, I think I need those old mints. I was so happy that she was happy. And I was also happy that she went to bed. Because I took from her grade A pile a Snicker bar. I was justifying to myself that I would buy her another one Well, the next morning, Allison ran down from her bed to her candy table. I knew I was in trouble when I saw her counting the good candy. I was hoping that she would pass over it, but she burst into tears. And she came running to me and immediately began to accuse her brother of taking one of her prized Snicker bars. And I sat her down and I said, Allison, it was not Aaron. I took the Snicker bar. She looked at me in almost disbelief. My heart sank because I saw in her face for the first time the realization that her dad wasn't perfect. Allison, I'm sorry. Amends. I should have asked you, will you please forgive me? Now, he writes, how a 5-year-old would answer that, I don't know. She turned toward her candy, collected it all, looked at me, and went with her candy to her room. The collecting of the candy hurt me deeply. It was visual evidence that I could no longer be trusted. So I went to my study, began working on my computer. Hang time. In about 15 minutes, Allison came to my study. And then I realized how a 5-year-old answers the question, will you forgive me? She reached out her hand and handed me a Snicker. That afternoon, I went out and I bought her the largest Snicker ever made. See, that's making amends. And do you notice in that little example, it means it's being humble. It's dropping the image of perfection, because that's one of the things we don't want to do when we try to make amends. People won't think I'm as perfect as I try to make it myself out. It's being honest. It's admitting wrong. And it's being vulnerable. So here it is, folks. We are not talking about taking candy from a baby. We're talking about our character defects that have injured people deeply, people that we love. Where our past insanity has allowed us to rob the trust and the emotional well-being of others. And if we don't make that right, if we don't make amends, guess what? We're adding another newspaper to our bag. Another newspaper to our bag, our emotional bag. All right, let me give you just real quick a couple of points of clarity. This is essential for you to know. Now, when you go into this process where you think success is that you'll be reconciled in the relationship, that's not what this step is about, because that may not happen. Remember, especially if you're a control freak, this is what you're saying, oh, this is how I can control, I'll do this, and then everything will be fine. No, your main goal in this step is not to make friends through this. It is to make your past wrongs right. See, relationships are a two-way street. You're responsible to clean up your side of the street. You cannot be responsible or control the other person's reaction as much as you would like to. I mean, Paul said it like this. Look at this, Romans 12:18. It says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. This is as far as possible goes. Not every person you go to make amends is going to give you a Snicker bar. Not every person that you go to make amends is going to give you a hug or a kiss. Some are going to react to you with anger. And they're going to vent emotions that they've had maybe for years because you wronged them. And they're going to spew perhaps accusations at you. How dare you come back after all these years and try to make up for what you've done? They may rage at you. They may like hating you. And now you're trying to take away that hate? They don't want to give it up. So there are risks to making amends. But what I want you to leave here this morning is this: the benefits are well worth it. The greatest benefit is how it will revitalize your spiritual health. Look at this story. You know this story. Luke 19, if you want to turn to it, it's on the screen. Luke 19, 1 through 8. It's a story about a tax collector. Now listen to this and talk about amends. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was so short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree, to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached that spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. I would love to just been there to see the dynamics, and because no one invited, you would never, tax collectors were the outcast of outcasts. All the people saw this and they began to mutter, he's going to be the guest of a sinner. And by the way, that's not something, I remember my mother had a little crochet deal, I don't know what it's called, needlepoint or something, and it said, friend of sinners. We kind of like lit candles in front of it. But that was not considered a compliment, and not in this context. It was an accusation. He's a friend of sinners, that kind of thing. So Zacchaeus stood up and he said to the Lord, "Lord, look, here and now, I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times that amount." And I got to tell you, that is just a normal kingdom response. Jesus is so emphatic about this that he says in Matthew 5:23, "Therefore, if you're going to church to offer your gift on the altar, and there you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and make amends and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift." If we're going to put it in today, especially this morning, if you're in church and you're having communion and you're getting ready to take the elements, but you remember there's some stuff going on between you and someone else, and you haven't made it right, at least you haven't made amends or asked for forgiveness, leave the elements. Now, why would Jesus be so concerned about this? And this is something I want you to see as a church. It will help us. It will really help us to get to the next level of growth. And it's this: our relationship with God is impeded when there are impediments with other people. That there's a connection, right? This table represents this. What? Jesus Christ, who being God, humbled himself, set aside all of his majesty. Why? Died a horrible death on a cross. Why? So that we could be reconciled to God. So did you get it? Jesus humbles himself. He was God. He humbles himself. One translation, he emptied himself. And he set aside all the majesty. Why? So that you could be reconciled. He wanted to reconcile you. And yet we're his people, and very often we are not willing to set aside our glorious pride to be reconciled to each other, especially people we have harmed. Well, that's what step 8 and 9 are about. Now, how do we do it? And we're going to stop. Step 8 says, make a list. I don't think most of us need to do that, because I think if you go back to your first list of your defects that I hope you wrote out, just go through that list. And I bet you on each of those defects, a face or a name, a relationship will pop up, and you'll respond. And then the last thing is this. When doing this step, attitude comes before action. You know what I mean by that? You don't just go say, oh, hey, I heard a sermon on step 8, now I got to do this step. You don't just go to someone so you can fulfill a step. They'll see right through it. This is not a game. You have to ask yourself, in terms of your attitude, do I really feel remorse? One of the words I often use for myself, to myself, is, do I feel embarrassed by what I've done? And when I see them in church, do I just want to avoid it? Or this Thanksgiving, when you get together with your family, maybe your family is just the paramount of mental health. But in my family, it's not the case. If I go with my family to Thanksgiving dinner, I need 3 weeks of solid therapy. So what are you going to do with this step? Make amends to such people wherever possible that you've injured and hurt because of your defects. Whose snicker did you take? Let's pray. Oh, Lord, there's so much in these steps and so much that's just difficult. So much it just seems each one is a mirror of the truth of your scriptures and because they are inspired. God, I just pray that you would help us. Lord, some of us are still going through a very difficult time with defects. We're having a hard time getting rid of it. We're having a hard time letting go. Maybe we feel trapped. So, Lord, give us direction and guidance. I pray that. But, Lord, also give us the courage to be able to go to those people and say, I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry. Would you forgive me? And then let the hang time hang. We can't guarantee their response. We can only clean our side of the street. So, Lord, give us your grace as a church to bring that into our fellowship. Help us to treat one another with kingdom principles, not with religious, churchy stuff. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.